Unable to kinetically compete with the US, Russia and China have resorted to hybrid warfare, ushering in the next chapter of great power conflict. So first, we must establish, what does hybrid warfare really mean? This umbrella term means different things to different people, but it ultimately can be broken into geopolitical actors using a variety of conventional and unconventional means to achieve strategic objectives. It's sort of a blurry term that is employed somewhere in between war and peace. Although there are essentially limitless methods available in the hybrid warfare toolkit, many common ones include disinformation campaigns, cyberattacks, economic coercion, political subversion, and covert sabotage operations. If you look in the news, you'll see Russia and China employing a wide range of these tactics, with notable examples including Russia's, quote, little green men conducting operations to seize Crimea during the beginning of the Russo-Ukrainian War in 2014, interference in Western elections, with several Russians implicated in crimes in the 2016 US presidential election, as well as some cause for concern with the Romanian elections in 2024, although we don't want to open that can of worms here. Additionally, there's Chinese cyber infiltrations into US infrastructure on the West Coast. There's Chinese economic coercion and strategic withholding of aid for countries that recognize Taiwan. We've seen Chinese crewed ships in the Baltic dragging anchors across key communication lines in the ocean, as well as Chinese Coast Guard ships bullying Filipino resupply vessels in the South China Sea, the whole TikTok thing, supposedly, as well as many more. So you'll see that these countries have become quite adept at subkinetic means of warfare to exploit societal vulnerabilities, stir international tensions among allied nations, and shake confidence in political and economic institutions. The problem with all this for Western democracies is that there's no proper way to respond to these transgressions because they're difficult to attribute, divisive within these countries, and they place the responding nation in a diplomatic conundrum, to escalate or to not escalate. Thus, they present an immense challenge to the current world order. Is the West going to allow Russia and China to continue this political bullying? Despite having stronger economic, political, and military institutions, the US and its allies struggle to unite against this threat and respond with unilateral force and disapproval. So then, what can the so-called Western establishment do to counter this onslaught? The hybrid threat requires a few key elements to truly undermine its multifaceted approach to conflict. First, defending nations must be prepared to detect and attribute hybrid warfare activities to adversarial actors. This requires a strong degree of intelligence sharing, like the Five Eyes Alliance or Europol, without the US mucking things up, of course. It also requires investing in forensic technologies and resources to identify the agents who are facilitating these actions, whether it be cybersecurity threats, domestic intelligence threats, or even providing support for allied nations perceived to be weaker in this area. Lastly, it requires developing a common framework for what these countries are doing, making sure to frame these actions as harmful, having sufficient evidence to classify certain activities as hybrid warfare, and establishing the necessary institutions to communicate this message to the public. As you establish these systems and frameworks to identify and call out hybrid attacks, it is important to bolster society's resilience to these threats. As hot war conditions draw nearer, Russia and China will only benefit from the degradation of Western society. Therefore, there must be wide-scale education of the threat posed by these actors and identification of the typical means that they use to drive division. This is easier said than done, but a necessary step indeed. Finally, from a military standpoint, hybrid warfare requires special attention to counter its irregular methods. International cooperation and communication, along with common standards and protocols, are necessary for nations defending against this threat. Additionally, enhanced cyber defense capabilities with constant testing, analysis, and counterattack abilities are required. And then finally, there needs to be a system of response that is not afraid to escalate. With these attacks from Russia and China, the cat is already out of the bag. We must be able to respond with similar subkinetic means, as these dictators only know one language, and that's force. Thus, the West's best deterrent here is capable and effective hybrid warfare of its own. Looking at these three factors, attribution, societal resilience, and counter threats, it's clear that the US and its allies are lagging behind the competition. While these tactics play into the hands of authoritarian regimes, they are not immune from these attacks themselves. While I don't suggest that the West stoops to the level of Russia and China and start buzzing or radar-locking flights in international airspace, I do think it's entirely viable to target these societies with divisive actions, to seek economic measures that prove the necessity of free trade to their survival, and to retaliate to the cyber threat with our own capabilities. Moving outside the classroom setting, we will now look at two case studies of how this threat may be mitigated by a united front of Western allies. The first case focuses on the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, or CCDCOE. This collaborative effort among NATO members was established in May 2008 in Estonia to counter asymmetric threats following a 2007 cyber assault on several of Tallinn's government institutions. This eye-opening event spawned the creation of the Cyber Defense Center, a training and research institute dedicated to the protection of NATO countries from ongoing cyber threats. At the time, Estonia was joined by 6 other nations: Germany, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, and Spain. The primary responsibilities of this establishment are to increase cyber defense connectivity across the alliance, develop a unified doctrine of cyber defense, sponsor education, awareness, and training in the IT space, serve as a laboratory for cyber defense experimentation, and analyze the legal landscape around cyber defense. This organization is also responsible for the annual Locked Shield exercise, quote, the world's most advanced live-fire cyber defense exercise, in which NATO members work together to share tactics and information while also preparing procedures and resources in case of a real cyber attack. Notably, this effort inspires a high degree of international cooperation in response to the simulated threats, thus enhancing the capabilities of the alliance as a whole. Currently, 32 nation-states sponsor the organization, all members of NATO, while 7 other non-NATO states are contributing participants, notably Ukraine. This effort has been largely successful in meeting the evolving demands of cyber warfare, especially given an escalation in Russian activity from 2014 onwards. While there are of course still cyber vulnerabilities in the constantly adapting threat environment, the continued support and joint participation signal some degree of effectiveness. However, I believe a true measure of its efficacy cannot be measured unless compared to a situation without its presence in which the West faced a similar level of Russian cyber aggression. While it's hard to state the true value of this effort, it is clearly a right step in the path to building resiliency, developing a cyber deterrence, and enhancing cooperation among Western allies. Hence, I present it as a case study in the effective defense against Russian hybrid warfare. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, I point to the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, in its efforts to counter Chinese hybrid warfare. The Quad, comprising the United States, Japan, India, and Australia, has emerged as a significant counterforce to China's hybrid warfare tactics in the Indo-Pacific region. While not a formal military alliance, the Quad has evolved since its inception in 2007 to address a wide range of security challenges, with a particular focus in countering Chinese influence. The primary responsibilities and initiatives of the Quad include enhancing maritime security and domain awareness, countering disinformation and cyber threats, promoting economic cooperation and infrastructure development, strengthening technological cooperation and innovation, and finally coordinating diplomatic efforts to maintain a rules-based international order. To meet these objectives, the Quad executes a variety of exercises and efforts. So first is the Malabar Naval Exercises, which are annual naval drills involving all 4 Quad members, enhancing interoperability and maritime cooperation. Next, there's the Supply Chain Resiliency Initiative, aimed at reducing economic dependencies on China and creating alternative supply chains, particularly for military hardware and technologies. There's also the Quad Vaccine Partnership, which was a collaborative effort to produce and distribute COVID-19 vaccines, countering China's vaccine diplomacy efforts. Additionally, there's the Critical and Emerging Technologies Working Group, which focuses on developing and securing critical technologies like AI, 5G, and quantum computing chips outside of China's reach. These efforts have been somewhat successful in presenting a united front against Chinese hybrid warfare tactics in some of these following ways. So first, there's improved maritime domain awareness and a coordinated response to Chinese gray zone activities in the South China Sea. There's then enhanced cybersecurity cooperation, including joint efforts to combat disinformation campaigns. There's increased economic resilience among member states and partner nations in the Indo-Pacific. And then there's strengthened diplomatic coordination, which leads to more cohesive responses to Chinese coercive actions. Similar to the CCD-COE, it's difficult to attribute a quantitative or even a solid qualitative value to the Quad in its efforts to tackle Chinese hybrid warfare. However, there's some success that can be attributed, such as increased regional support for Quad initiatives, including from ASEAN countries, China's diplomatic responses and attempts to discredit the Quad, suggesting it perceives the group as a significant challenge, and finally growing interest from other countries to engage with the Quad, such as the Quad Plus format, including Vietnam, New Zealand, and South Korea. Ultimately, the Quad represents a flexible and adaptive approach to countering Chinese hybrid warfare, combining diplomatic, economic, and security initiatives. Its continued evolution and expanding scope demonstrates its potential to be a key player in the shaping of the strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific region. However, the long-term effectiveness of the Quad will depend on its ability to maintain unity among its members and to consistently deliver on its initiatives and promises to partner nations in the face of persistent Chinese counter-efforts. This is something that remains to be seen as turbulent political times challenge the established leadership across Quad's members. These two case studies, both incidentally spawning in 2007, show the merits of international collaboration in response to hybrid warfare and also underscore just how much further we have to go. The threat environment is truly only escalating, and so Western nations must think about what comes next. The Russian and Chinese governments have become more alienated, more aggressive, and less dependent on the international system, serving to renew their desire to commit hybrid warfare to achieve national geostrategic goals. Additionally, their agents have become more creative, more entrenched in Western society, and are more emboldened to commit violence than before, such as in the DHL incidents in late 2024. Thus, this modern problem must see enhanced scrutiny, attention, and resources as we enter the latter half of the 2020s. Times are changing, and so is the art of war.